Like, to summarize, since this is your first time being exposed to this discussion, we'll summarize, inshallah, or for some of you, the first time being exposed to this discussion, all of the mabahith, discussions regarding knowledge and its reality that are held by the Usuliyun in their books. So number one, we say, اختلف العلماء في العلم هل هو مما يحد أم لا. Firstly, the Usuliyun differed. We're going to speak about the Usuliyun over here. But in reality, they're also masters in the other sciences as well. They differ to begin with. Can knowledge actually be defined or not? And before them, the philosophers differed regarding this. Is knowledge something that can actually be defined or not? Meaning, can you have a definition of knowledge? Or is knowledge something that can never be defined? فذهب الجمهور إلى أنه يحد. The majority say that you can define knowledge. وذهب البعض, and some said that knowledge is necessarily understood, the reality of it is necessarily comprehended, and it is not given a definition by itself. And from them is Al-Fakhr Al-Razi. Meaning Al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala, he held the opinion that knowledge is daruri. It is known by way of necessity, and you can't define it. Everyone just knows what it is. We all know what knowledge is, but we just can't define it. There's no definition for it. Like, what was the proof, or from the proofs that Al-Razi mentions? He says, احتج بأن الحد يكشف عن حقيقة المحدود وبالعلم تكشف الأشياء. طيب. He says, when you look at the art of definition, in defining something, you have the matter which you are defining, which is al-mahdud, and then you have the had, which is the definition. The purpose of the definition is to allow us to understand the essence, the core, the reality of what we are trying to define. Of what we are trying to define. And how do we do that? We do that by way of knowledge, by way of presenting information, knowledge regarding that thing which we're trying to define. So al-insan, let's say someone doesn't have knowledge regarding al-insan, but he knows what haywan is and he knows what natiq is. So in order to define insan, we tell him al-insanu haywan natiq. Insan is al-haywan al-natiq. So we use his knowledge of al-haywan and we use his knowledge of al-natiq in order to arrive at knowledge of al-insan. So there's jahala. The jahala is pertaining to al-insan. He doesn't know what that is. He wants a definition. But he has ilm regarding al-haywan and al-natiq. We use his ilm regarding al-haywan and al-natiq in order to remove his jahala regarding al-insan. That's what defining something is. Okay. So in order to define something, again, we're defining al-insan. We use the knowledge of al-haywaniyya and al-natiq. In order to define al-insan, we use the individual's knowledge of al-haywan and al-natiq. And only then can you arrive at his understanding. For example, you say to someone, al-insanu haywanun natiq. He doesn't know what haywan means and he doesn't know what natiq means. Have you defined al-insan for him? The answer is no. He's going to be like, okay, what's haywan, what's natiq? I don't know what that is either. So in order for him to arrive at an understanding, the essence of what is trying to be defined, he has to have knowledge of the definition, of what you're mentioning in the definition. So through knowledge, you're able to arrive at, through knowledge of certain things, you're able to arrive at knowledge regarding other things. طيب. So the mahdud, what is trying to be defined, in its had, in the definition, we will always use the knowledge of the person regarding something to arrive at what is not known. Or in other words, we use what is known to arrive at what is not known. Like, now, when it comes to defining knowledge, if you wanted to define knowledge, you have two options. Either you define knowledge with other than knowledge, something other than knowledge. Then we say over here, anything other than knowledge will not be able to, like ignorance, for example, or anything other than knowledge, will not be able to grant knowledge because it's other than knowledge. So like we said, if the person doesn't know what haywan is and he doesn't know what natiq is, then we can't use that as a definition for al-insan because he doesn't have knowledge regarding al-haywan and al-natiq. So how's that going to assist in him understanding what al-insan is? فَلَوْ حُدَّ الْعِلْمِ بِغَيْرِ الْعِلْمِ كَانَ غَيْرُ الْعِلْمِ كَاشِفًا وَذَلِكَ مُمْتَنِعٌ. Meaning, other than knowledge can never open the understanding and grant understanding. It always has to be knowledge which leads to further understanding. And then he says, وَلَوْ حُدَّ بِالْعِلْمِ لَزِمَ تَعْرِيفُ الشَّيْءِ بِنَفْسِهِ. The other option is that you define knowledge with knowledge. Over here, that would mean you're defining something with itself. And you can never define something with itself, because that's not a definition. If I say, for example, what's the definition of al-insan? I reply by saying al-insan. That's not a definition. You say, what's the definition of al-insan? We say, the definition of al-insan is al-haywan al-natiq. Al-haywan غير الإنسان. Al-natiq غير الإنسان. The understanding of al-natiq is not the same as the understanding of al-insan. But if you say, what's the definition of knowledge? The definition of knowledge is al-ilm, knowledge. That's a problem. And then he says, also we find that every single individual, every single person, even the one who is not able to use rational deduction, knows regarding himself that he exists. And he knows regarding himself, for example, that he is attaining pleasure when he's attaining pleasure, or he's enjoying, he's having fun when he's having fun. Or he knows, for example, that he is experiencing pain, let's say when he's experiencing pain. So the knowledge of the person regarding his own states is daruri, is necessary. Everyone has that knowledge. Whether the person is young or whether he's old, whether he's small or whether he's, for example, baligh, whether he is male or whether it's a female, whether, for example, he is intellectual, he has a sanity, or he doesn't have a sanity. Even a majnoon individual, if he feels pain, he will know that he's feeling pain, meaning he consciously recognizes that he's feeling pain. So everyone's knowledge pertaining to themselves is daruri. وَإِذَا كَانَ ضَرُورِيًا, and if it's necessary, فَلَا يُحَدْ, يعني we don't need to give it a definition. إِذْ لَا فَائِدَةَ فِي حَدِّ الضَّرُورِ لِحُصُولِهِ مِنْ غَيْرِ حَدٍّ. Okay, so Al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala, looking at this, he says, knowledge cannot be defined. What's the response to this? The response is that we are not defining knowledge using knowledge. Rather, there's a subtle difference between the two. For example, we say, in order for you to ever understand the definition of anything, you need to have a generic concept of that matter, even if it's just the name of it. Like, for example, someone has never seen an orange or tried an orange. So he wants to know what an orange is. But he has to at least have heard the word orange. And he cannot completely have no idea what it is. Not its name or nothing to do with it. There has to be ijmali ilm regarding even what is being defined in order to arrive at ilm tafsil. And whenever you define something, the person at least needs to know the name. Like, for example, you're like, I'm going to define for you al-insan. Like, he's never ever heard of the term al-insan before. And his mind has never ever come across the concept of what is al-insan. So first you need to explain to him, mention to him the term, and then tell him, I'll define it for you. But for someone to have complete jahala regarding something, he can never go from there to having direct knowledge regarding it. First, he has to get what we know as ilm ijmali, a generic idea of it, and then after that, we go into a more detailed understanding of what it actually is. So initially, there needs to be ilm ijmali, and then we grant ilm tafsili. We grant ilm tafsili. Likewise, when it comes to the matters of, or the idea of defining knowledge, we say we're not defining knowledge with knowledge itself. But rather, initially, there is ijmal. There is a tasawwur ijmali of what ilm is. But we don't know the exact reality of it. And we are using a tasawwur tafsili of what ilm is to grant us the reality of it. So, in this situation, the initial objection of Al-Imam Al-Razi, rahimahullah ta'ala, is removed. That we are not using knowledge to define knowledge. We're not trying to define something with itself. Rather, we have a generic idea of it, and then we are giving a more detailed understanding regarding it in order to remove that generic idea or replace that generic idea regarding it. طيب. So the majority of the Usuliyun say that knowledge can be defined. طيب. Now from this majority, there are some that said that we are able to define it. However, they then differed. From them, there were those that said that it is muta'assir. Muta'assir meaning, is it possible to define? Yes. But realistically, practically, it's not possible. Meaning logically, it's possible that it could be defined. But practically and realistically, it is not possible, meaning it is muta'assir. And the only way you can truly understand it is by mentioning its different types. Now you'll study in mantiq, inshallah, that one of the forms of defining something is to do taqseem of it. But taqseem is not a real definition. Taqseem is not a real definition because you're not defining the essence of the shay, you are simply categorizing it. So what is an ism? Or what is al-hukm al-shar'i? So instead of saying خطاب الله تعالى المتعلق بأفعال المكلفين اقتضاء أو تخييرا أو أعم وضعا, instead of saying that, I say الحكم الشرعي هو الإيجاب والكراهة والندب والإباحة والكراهة والحظر. I just mentioned the different categories of al-ahkam al-shar'iyya, والسبب والمانع والصحة والفساد, and so on and so forth. So instead of defining it, I mentioned the different categories and types. So doing taqseem is not a real definition. It's only resorted to when you cannot define with an actual definition. So there's some usuliyun that said, is it possible to define? Yes, but it's very difficult. Practically, it's not possible. And therefore, we resort to mentioning the different types of knowledge. We'll simply mention the different types of knowledge. And this is what Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala does. And in reality, Al-Imam Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, the way he describes this is, look, there's different types of beliefs or feelings that a person has inside his mind. But the belief he has will either be a firm belief, al-i'tiqad imma jazim or ghayr jazim. So number one, we'll start with belief. Belief is either going to be a firm belief or a non-firm belief, a belief which is not firm. And the belief which is firm will either be in actuality corresponding with reality, or it will be non-corresponding with reality. So for example, Muslims have firm belief that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger of Allah. Christians have firm belief that Isa alayhi wasallam is the son of God. One of them, in both of them have al-i'tiqad al-jazim, meaning there's a belief and it's firm. One of them is in correspondence with reality, and the other one is not in correspondence with reality, factuality. Meaning one of them is actually a fact in actuality, and the other one is not. So number one, al-i'tiqad will either be jazim or ghayr jazim. Either it's going to be firm or non-firm. Then if it's firm, it's either going to be corresponding with the actual fact or non-corresponding with the actual fact. And if it's corresponding with the actual fact, either it will be such a belief that cannot be removed, or either it will be a belief that can be removed. And as we categorize it into different categories, now we'll give a different name to all of them. So al-i'tiqad al-ghayr jazim, we're going to give it a different name. And al-i'tiqad al-jazim ghayr mutabiq, we're going to give it a certain name. And al-i'tiqad al-jazim al-mutabiq ghayr thabit, we're going to give it a different name. And al-i'tiqad al-jazim al-mutabiq al-thabit, we're going to give it a different name. What is al-ilm? Al-ilm is al-i'tiqad al-jazim al-mutabiq al-thabit, justified true belief. It is a belief which is firm and it's in line with actuality, and it will always remain. It can never be removed. That is knowledge. So how did Al-Ghazali rahimahullah give it the definition of knowledge? By defining the different types of beliefs that a person can have and categorizing them, and then saying, we're going to call this one knowledge, we're going to call this one jahl, and we're going to call this one so and so, and we're going to call this one so and so. طيب فقد حصل عن القسمة اعتقاد جازم مطابق ثابت. اعتقاد جازم مطابق ثابت. That is ilm بمعنى اليقين, in the meaning of certainty, actual knowledge. طيب. So Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala says that we're going to use taqseem in order to define knowledge. طيب, Al-Ghazali is not the first one who came up with this idea of using taqseem. He actually took it from his teacher Al-Juwaini. And Al-Juwaini rahimahullah ta'ala, who is Sahib al-Waraqat, over here in Al-Waraqat, he mentions a definition for ilm. He says, وَالْعِلْمُ مَعْرِفَةُ الْمَعْلُومِ عَلَى مَا هُوَ بِهِ. And he gives us a definition. But in his actual work in Usul al-Fiqh, which is Al-Burhan, and we mentioned that Al-Juwaini rahimahullah ta'ala has 3 works in Usul al-Fiqh. Talkhis, which is his summary of the works of Al-Baqillani. And then he has Al-Burhan, which is his own personal work. And he has Al-Waraqat, which is what we're studying. In Al-Burhan, Al-Imam Al-Juwaini mentions a number of different opinions regarding the definitions that are out there regarding knowledge. And in the end, he says, the truth is that it is possible to define it, but it is muta'assirul wusul. It's difficult to arrive at that actual definition. And the only way to recognize it is by simply categorizing it, giving different categories. And by way of doing this taqsim, we'll understand which one we can call knowledge. So Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, he actually took this understanding from his teacher, Imam al-Haramain, that knowledge is nadari, meaning we can define it, lakin hadduhu asirun, or asura, na'am. It is difficult to define it. And it can only be recognized by way of taqsim and mithal. By way of taqsim, by way of distribution, and giving examples. Giving examples. طيب. So now, Al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala says we can't define it. It is daruri. It's self-evident. Everyone already knows what it is. We don't need to define it. And the Usuliyun, the majority say that we can define it. It can be defined. But then from the ones that say it can be defined, we have the likes of Al-Juwaini and Al-Ghazali that say it's difficult to define it and practically it's not possible. So we're just going to use taqsim. We're going to mention its categories and we're going to give amthila, examples. And from them, the majority of the Usuliyin still agree that you can actually define it. But then they differed regarding what its definition is into a number of definitions. In fact, their works, the single one term which probably has the most disagreement regarding is knowledge. What is knowledge? And the philosophers of the past and the theologians and the Usuliyin, legal jurists, for example, from the Muslims as well, they have differed in so many opinions, regarding what is knowledge. So from the definitions that are mentioned, from the best definitions that are mentioned, we'll mention some very nice definitions over here. The first definition is one of the best definitions mentioned regarding it. They say هو صفة توجب في الأمور المعنوية تمييزا لا يحتمل النقيض. Now, in the later books, inshallah, when you come across these definitions, you will study what each of these clauses is there for. And what's the benefit of mentioning صفة? Then توجب في الأمور المعنوية. Why are we saying الأمور المعنوية? Why are we saying تمييز لا يحتمل النقيض? What is the benefit of each of these clauses? You're going to study in the later levels. Right now, we're just exposing you to the fact that all of these definitions exist, and eventually, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, you will understand them word by word, clause by clause, the way we understood the previous definitions that we mentioned. Another definition they mention is هو صفة ينتفي بها عن الحي الجهل والشك والظن والسهو. This is not that good of a definition because you're using other terms that also need to be defined, and because of that, we try and avoid using other terminology that are specific to certain disciplines in defining matters. Another definition which is mentioned is صفة يتجلى بها المذكور لمن قامت هي به. This was the definition mentioned by Shaykh Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, and this is the definition that you'll find in the majority of the books of Usul al-Fiqh of the Hanafis. And it's also one of the best definitions that is out there. And the definition of Al-Imam Al-Razi, even though Al-Razi, he mentioned first, Al-Razi, what he did in his work is that he mentioned all the definitions, and he said the best of these definitions is this one that you see over here. But then he's like, but in reality, it's daruri la yuhad. So some misunderstood. Some thought that Razi actually used to, or thought that there was a good definition for it. In reality, Al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala is of the belief that you can't define it. But he still gave us the best definition from all of the definitions that are out there. So the definition he mentioned is حكم الذهن الجازم المطابق حكم الذهن الجازم المطابق للواقع لموجب. As-Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala preferred this definition. He said this is one of the best definitions. So As-Suyuti, in 2 lines, he gathers majority of what we said before. He says الفخر حكم الذهن أيض الجزم لموجب طابق حد العلم ثم ضروريا رآه يسفر وابن الجويني نظري عسير. Ya salam. He mentions all the 3 opinions. He mentions the main figures that held these opinions, and he mentions the best definition of knowledge as well. The best definition, according to him, is in the first line. Then he says the second opinion, which is that it can never be defined, is daruri. That's the opinion of Ra'ahu, yani Ra'a al-Razi, al-Fakhr, Ra'a al-Fakhr. And Ibn al-Juwaini felt it's nadari, but it's asir. يعني حده عسير مع أنه نظري يعني يمكن حده. طيب. Now, this is the crux, the summary of the discussions regarding al-ilm that you will come across in the books of Usūl al-Fiqh.